Jewish Channel's Week in Review. The ground war in Gaza, the latest on Iranian nuclear talks, street photography in a retrospective, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. The ground invasion of Gaza has led to well more than 20 deaths of Israeli soldiers, and the overall Palestinian death toll since the launch of Operation Protective Edge is now significantly higher than 500. 2 American Jewish emigres are among the Israeli soldiers killed. With the shift to a ground invasion, Israel's stated goals in the conflict are now the removal of tunnels Hamas has built that could be used either to infiltrate Israel directly or to hide caches of weapons. Footage of the tunnels and of Israeli efforts to destroy them have become signature images of this war. And amid the rocket fire, some are suggesting that the larger image that's making this Gaza war different from the 2 that preceded it is the image that many have of Israel. In a post at Tablet, Andrew Silo Carroll wrote that public opinion may well be more with Israel in this war than it has been in conflicts past. He writes, quote, "In the current conflict's first 2 weeks, Congress and the White House has been fully and loudly on board with Israel's right to defend itself. The UN is quiescent, and even dependable European capitals have been slow to criticize." And Silo Carroll emphasized the comments of British Prime Minister David Cameron, who said, quote, "This crisis was triggered by Hamas raining hundreds of rockets on Israeli cities, indiscriminately targeting civilians in contravention of all humanitarian law and norms." And then there's a bold statement to come out of the European Union's Foreign Affairs Council. A meeting of 28 foreign ministers issued a long 10-point statement making specific calls for the implementation of a 2-state solution and specifically an end to Israel's occupation. But in its second paragraph, it offered a conclusion that may surprise many. The EU strongly condemns the indiscriminate firing of rockets into Israel by Hamas and militant groups in the Gaza Strip, directly harming civilians. These are criminal and unjustifiable acts. The EU calls on Hamas to immediately put an end to these acts and to renounce violence. All terrorist groups in Gaza must disarm. The EU strongly condemns calls on the civilian population of Gaza to provide themselves as human shields. All of this speaks to the possibility that Hamas is isolated in a way it hasn't been before. The conduct of Egypt in attempting to broker a ceasefire while not standing for any of Hamas's demands, while at the same time closing its borders with Gaza to weapons smuggling, is a major turn. The Arab League is essentially silent, and the Palestinian Authority, governed by the Fatah Party, is outspoken in its criticism of Hamas. The PA's representative to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva made these surprising statements in a TV interview. "The missiles that are now being launched against Israel, each and every missile constitutes a crime against humanity, whether it hits or misses, because it is directed at civilian targets." That ambassador, Ibrahim Karshi, even went on to defend the collateral killing of civilian Palestinians by the Israelis when Israel warns those civilians to evacuate, saying, quote, "If someone is killed, the law considers it a mistake rather than an intentional killing because they followed the legal procedures." And at the same time that Israel seems to be gaining an upper hand with Hamas on the publicity front, an MIT physicist and missile defense expert has suggested that Israel's successes in defending itself may have relatively little to do with the vaunted Iron Dome system that has been touted. MIT's Ted Postal says that while the Iron Dome system has been successfully intercepting Hamas rockets, it has not been successfully intercepting those rockets where it matters most, at the warhead, and that therefore the success Israel has achieved in avoiding civilian casualties has far more to do with its early warning system and bomb shelter network, as well as the small warheads Hamas is able to attach to its rockets. But however Israel is gaining an upper hand on multiple fronts in its conflict with Hamas, a potential problem hundreds of miles away is revealing itself anew. Iranian nuclear talks have failed to produce a final agreement within the initial allotted time frame set in February and have been extended until November. Numerous reports quote anonymous Western and U.S. officials saying they believe that Iranian negotiators are genuinely trying to reach a deal rather than buy time for further nuclear development. But recent world events suggest Iran's position as a world power is shifting as the anti-Iranian group ISIS takes over larger portions of Iraq and Syria, and Iran backer Russia is flexing its muscles in Crimea, and the Iran-backed Hamas is shooting thousands of rockets into Israel. Iran has several levers it can pull to get what it wants from Western governments. What Iran chooses to trade in one area for compliance in another could well dictate much of the future security considerations for Israel and the United States in the region. Meantime, threats against the health of Jewish youth can also come from sources within the Jewish community, and for the first time this year, 2 new cases of newborn babies contracting herpes due to a controversial circumcision ritual were reported by the New York City Department of Health. These infections are especially notable because they are the first to occur under the administration of New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, who had been perceived by Hasidic leaders as willing to be more lenient on the issue than his predecessor, Michael Bloomberg. We will continue to follow this story. Moving on, a new museum exhibit looks at an icon in the world of street photography. Christian Needon reports.
These photographs evoke the vibrancy of mid-century New York City, taken by a Jewish photographer whose unique eye for life on both city avenues and small-town streets left a legacy of images currently being celebrated by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. 30 years after his passing, Gary Winogrand was 56 at his death in 1984, and the Met is presenting more than 175 of his photos in a retrospective spanning 4 decades. Helping to organize the showing is former Winogrand student Jeff Rosenheim, who is curator in charge of the Met's Department of Photographs. He summed up Winogrand's importance to the art of the photograph.
What he did was transform photography in the urban scene into the art form that it is today. His pictures are extraordinary. They're dynamic. The subject is who we are and how we live and what our anxieties and tensions are. And more than anything else, I would say that he reminds us that there is this thing called poetry. It can be found in the street.
Winogrand's vivid street photos feature lots of candid shots from a close distance, a product of Winogrand's skill and the luck of circumstance.
You know, when you're a street photographer, you can't direct it. You can only imagine what could happen as the collision of individuals and the moment come together. And the greatest artists working in the urban street come with a set of tricks, one of which is light, one of which is the medium itself, sharpness, focus, depth. But this artist tried everything he could to make pictures that had never been made before, and he did it.
Perhaps the most evocative of those photos is the one that has become the face of this retrospective, that of a woman dancing with a partner inside a nightclub in 1955.
It was called El Morocco, fabulously important nightclub where all the cool people went. And he brought his camera onto the dance floor and he started photographing people as they were couples, as they were enjoying the pleasures of the music and the experience of being in a pretty hot spot. He also photographed them at their tables. What's interesting is that he's so close. He's practically dancing with the figures that are in the picture.
Close proximity was the key trick to Winogrand's trade and his most memorable work.
He's a real voyeur, and he's an unapologetic voyeur. And that is the direction that he took photography. He was in the face of his subjects, they surrounded him, and it allows us in a kind of intimate way into the shape of the moment, into the emotions and the gestures. He really believed that gestures had meaning.
To see more from the Metropolitan Museum of Art's retrospective of photographs by Gary Winogrand, now on display through September 21st, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. In the world of sports, we've just passed the All-Star break in the Major League Baseball season, and in this week's episode of Up Close, we're offering a look at how baseball influences and is influenced by broader American culture, including the moral dilemmas and broader conflicts the sport reveals. First, one of the defining moral considerations of baseball has been the expulsion of Pete Rose for gambling. Baseball's all-time leader in hits, he'd be a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame based on his on-the-field performance alone, but he's banned from baseball, even as players who view steroids in the modern era aren't. Tangling with Pete Rose, an American dilemma, is Sports Illustrated Associate Managing Editor Kostya Kennedy. For pop culture historian and journalist Dan Epstein, there's no period in baseball more worth remembering than the 1970s. And especially in 1976, he argues, baseball came to represent a changing American spirit, just as the game itself changed dramatically. His book is Stars and Strikes, Baseball in America in the Bicentennial Summer of '76. Here are some of the highlights from my interview with Kostya Kennedy. There have been countless people who've said that baseball is America's religion, that we build for its stadia and statuary. And if baseball is America's religion, then its great moral controversy is, or at least was, the question of Pete Rose.
Right. No, I think that's fair. It is the type of, right, the church of baseball, as it's called. And I think that it's seen that way. You know, for immigrants, too, when they come here and they see baseball, a lot of Jewish immigrants, certainly, if you can understand baseball, and be part of it on the street and part of the lingua franca of baseball. It really meant you were belonging to America in a way. I think that was true in the 1800s and certainly around World War II and all that. So it's certainly all that it's true about the stature of baseball. And the Rose dilemma is at the center of so much of that.
Right, and within that controversy, you have on the one hand steroid era players whom we know did steroids to achieve certainly some of their late career statistical achievements, who are on the Hall of Fame ballot but not getting in. But Pete Rose never on the Hall of Fame ballot. And you speak to some people and some legends who are okay with that and some who are not okay with that.
Yeah, it is pretty split, and I think that the Hall of Fame, the body of Hall of Famers are split just like general baseball fans and general public are split on how they feel about Pete. So as you say, he wasn't even allowed on the ballot, and that was something that was forced upon him 2 years after he was banned. So that you get guys like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens who were involved in steroids and are now coming on the ballot, and they're getting about 35–40% of the vote. You need 75 to get in. So clearly some people think, okay, you know, they were great players anyway, and if they took the drug, they took the drug, but still they had to hit the ball, they had to pitch it. And other people say, no way. Nobody hits the way Barry Bonds hit after the age of 37. It's preposterous, and it violated the game, and there's no way I'd vote for him. And that is sort of reflected in the vote. Pete, we just don't know. Some people might vote for him, some people might not. They just never had a chance. Pete is the only player in baseball history to be denied a chance who would have appeared on the ballot but didn't.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable. You can also listen to the full audio of Up Close as a podcast, available on iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish channel, be well. The Jewish channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.